Morning everybody, welcome to our education panel discussion. My name's Hewitson, I'm from Edge Hill University and I'm a senior lecturer in computer science and ICT for the PGCE programme, and it's wonderful to see here one of my ex-trainees here who's also teaching computer science. I want to present to you today our panel who are all experts in their areas using the Raspberry Pi. So we have Jan Harper here from the primary part of our organisation. We have Matthew Parry, sorry
That's
Matthew.
right, it's fine.
Matthew Parry, who is a CAS master teacher and also a teacher at a school in Swanage. We have Carrie and Philbin here, who is our Raspberry Pi education pioneer specialist here, and we have Swan, who is also a pioneer specialist but from the OCR organisation and also a CAS master teacher.
I'm a full-time teacher, yeah.
We've brought you here today to listen to a few bits and pieces that they have to say about the Raspberry Pi and computer science education, and also to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. I've worked with a number of these colleagues for a number of months now, and well, a number of years really, a couple of years, and we're all very keen to include the Raspberry Pi in the education, in the education forum, and it's certainly a cause that's very close to my heart and something that I feel very passionate about. I've been very, very vociferous with my students, trying to encourage them to engage with this, and it's been good to to be able to contribute to this wonderful movement. So I'm going to start off by introducing Carrie Ann. Carrie Ann, do you want to?
Okay. For those of you who perhaps weren't in the talk this morning or yesterday, the education team at the Raspberry Pi Foundation has grown very quickly. So for quite a long time, for about a year, Clive Bill, who's the Director of Education at the Raspberry Pi Foundation, was kind of on his own. He's a bit of a lone voice. And now there's 4 of us. So there's myself, there's Clive, there's Ben Nuttall, who's at the back, and Dave Spice, who is on the OCR stand if you want to go towards him as well. So we're sort of 50% teachers or ex-teachers and 50% people who are from industry who have done really great things like running workshops or jams. And our announcement really this week is that we're producing a new website, and on that website will be resources for teachers to be able to teach computing at all key stages that meets the new programme of study. There will be resources on there for self-learners who want to perhaps learn their own way through computing. Perhaps they want to achieve something like Matthew this morning spoke about robotics. Maybe they want to build a robot, they would find all the lessons they need to be able to do that. Or for people who want to run workshops, who aren't teachers but want to help out schools by running some kind of code club or Saturday club, jam, that kind of thing. So that's me. I think there are better people to talk about this than me.
Okay. Could we go to Matthew, please? Could you share your?
Yeah, sure. I actually teach in a special school in Swanwick down in Derbyshire, and primary trained. And before I was a teacher, I worked in the IT industry for 15 years. And one of the things that I'm quite passionate about, especially with the students that I've got because of their literacy levels, is the robotics side of things, the kinesthetic use of the Raspberry Pi. So I've built robots with them using a big track, and I'm going to be showing that later on the OCR stand for people to see that. Robot arms and stuff, and I just think the Raspberry Pi is just one of those, it's a little box. You can look at the hardware and the software and change it and stuff, and that's what I use it for in my classroom.
Okay. Jan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Jan Harper. I suppose I'm a bit of an outsider in a way, because I'm not a teacher and I'm not a tech. I've been working with schools, primary schools mainly in Lancashire, to help them think about really their ICT technology strategies, by which I mean thinking about whether or not they have a plan for their IT spend, for their teaching, for everything down to where they're going to store stuff, who's looking after it, how you track it, and what you should make out of it. So it's that background I'm coming from. As soon as I saw the Pi, although I'm not a techie, I knew it was a game changer. And I knew that the intention, I think I'm right in saying, is for every kid to have one and for every kid to code absolutely sat well with what schools, some schools were and all schools should be doing. So I think I'm here, if I can contribute anything, it'll be on the people side of things, the who, the how, the where, the when stuff, that you get all this wonderful knowledge and information into school, and particularly in schools where, if you just stop and think about it for a minute, you've got teachers with large classes, they have to teach everything from, I don't know, French, English, maths, you know it, and now they've got coding on top of it, and it's a generation of teachers, generally and broadly speaking, who don't have a coding background. They never sat down and coded. They're used to using more out of the box and apps and stuff. So it's how you bridge that gap with very already busy teachers, and how you make the first steps of getting not just coding, but then using things like the Raspberry Pi into a classroom or into a school. So I think that's where I'll be maybe contributing today.
And last but not least, can I introduce you to Chris, please? Chris, would you like to share a bit about yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm a secondary school teacher. I'm a full-time teacher. I do work for OCR, and I have done for the last 2 years, but my background's quite varied. I started out as a science teacher, and I was working out yesterday, I've actually been teaching 24 years, so you don't even get that for a major crime now, do you? Yeah, but I've been teaching for 24 years, and I started out teaching science, I taught DT along the way, and then I went into FE, HE, and found myself head of computing. I did do a degree in between there, and now I'm back in secondary school and absolutely loving it. But because I've been in teaching so long, I've seen this go around and come back again. Because when I first started teaching, we were using BBC computers, and you had to learn how to program BBC Basic, otherwise you couldn't get it to do anything. It was quite difficult to make a robotic buggy out of it because it was a great big hulking thing, and you couldn't connect it to the internet. So that's the difference. We've now got something that's small enough to fit in your pocket, and you can do all sorts of exciting things with it, and you can connect it to the internet. There's my little Wi-Fi adapter there. So I've been doing lots of projects with my students using Raspberry Pi, and I'm going to stick my neck out here, and I'm going to say pretty much you could teach the whole of GCSE computing. I'm quite prepared to stick my neck out here. GCSE computing, get yourself a set of those, and you can cover everything. I've done all of the networking on Raspberry Pi, and it's been brilliant. Can I just ask, secondary colleagues, could you put your hand up if you're a colleague working in a secondary school? Okay, put your hands down. And primary, please. That's great. So I can kind of pitch and help them answer questions based on about 50-50, aren't we? That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Has anybody got a question that they would like to sort of share with the panel, or a question they'd like to ask?
I'll go on.
Go on.
I work with preparing teachers to teach the new curriculum, and it always seems like the way that we do CPD at the moment, where someone comes to us for one day and then we have to absolutely blitz them and leave them wrecks at the end, because if people are coming from no computing experience and now they're expected to do this stuff, I was wondering if any of you have any opinions about a better model than a one-day blitz for teaching computing for teachers.
Raspberry Jams, events like this, they are the way that CPD should be done. You know, I think all teachers should, and I say this strongly all the time to every teacher I talk to, get out of the classroom. They should leave their schools. They shouldn't sit in their offices and in their classrooms and in their staff rooms. They need to go out and embrace the community. So like things like PyCon is a fantastic event that happens once a year that's full of brilliant software developers, industry experts, and they run lots of education courses, and they sit down with teachers and they create, different activities, and that is a more beneficial CPD because you meet someone that you can talk to, and if you've got problems with something, you can speak to them again and again, contact them, and take that idea further rather than someone coming in and just sort of blitzing it. And that would be one way. Things like CAS hubs as well are really great to meet other people, which I'm sure you want to.
Yeah, CAS hubs I would have suggested was definitely the best way of doing it. Like computing at school have their own hubs where around at the local universities. In fact, there's a brand new one starting in Derby on Monday night, which I'm running. but they're all round the country, CAS hubs, where all the like-minded teachers can get together, not just secondary but primary teachers and things like that. Computing at schools. They've got the stand here and everything. Obviously, you can talk to myself or there's my card there has arrived.
Sorry.
So I've got other cards as well that you can have. But yeah, CAS hubs and things. As a CAS master teacher, one of the remits is to actually run CPD for teachers. And I've been running inset days in primary schools around Derbyshire and things, and lots of other CAS teachers do that, and also one-off shows and things like this coming here. But Chris, do you want to add some more about CAS?
I'd say one of the problems I have, because I teach full time, is actually releasing me from timetable. So I'm going to consider looking at different ways of providing support sessions to teachers using things like Google Hangouts, because I think that's a really good opportunity. If you can't get out of the classroom, and let's face it, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. I'm out of the classroom today, but if I keep on asking, eventually it's going to be a no. So I think it would be really useful if we could provide short, sharp sessions that teachers could access. They can be during the school day, but hey, it's just an hour. If you're a primary colleague, you might be able to get somebody just to cover your class for an hour while you take part in a Google Hangout. And I think that might be quite a useful way of doing it, just drip feeding in some support into classrooms.
Yeah, we were thinking of doing a day's training, but then follow it up with kind of 1 hour long webinar kind of thing once a week.
Yeah.
Because when we talk to teachers after the event, they say, this has been great, but I know I need to do it every week, or I'm going to forget it all. And then what I think happens is that they don't have the time to do it every week, and then by the time they need it.
And if you're a primary teacher, then you've got 10 other subjects that
Yes.
you're clamouring for your attention as well. So.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else got a question? We're all a bit quiet and shy.
Raspberry Pi, you talk about using it in the classroom with Key Stage 4. That's something that we're looking to do as well. We're taking on OCR in September for GCSE computing.
Brilliant.
And that's something we're looking to do, because we've got them, we use them after school and stuff, and it's seeing how we can use them in a worthwhile experience rather than just as a gimmick, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could like talk about your experiences if you.
I've actually got a PowerPoint. I was speaking in Westminster, Be Impressed, on Wednesday, and so ignore the title of this. This was just the. What I'll do is I'll move over here so I can actually see the screen as well. So unfortunately the lighting's not great here, but these are some pictures of my GCSE students. The guy on the left hand side, we went to the National Museum of Computing, so I'm going to slide in a little plug there. Do consider, if you're organising a school trip, primary, secondary, National Museum of Computing is great. It's not one of those places where they say, don't touch. It's exactly the opposite. You can touch stuff, you can pick it up, you can play with it, you can get involved. The computers work, and they're ancient, and that's fascinating. One of my students actually used one of the oldest working computers in the world, single-handedly. It's amazing. They come away really inspired. And what they're doing is actually creating the punched tape, actually bearing their name in code. And they then could take that home, and they really enjoyed that. On the right-hand side, you've got some programming going on in Scratch. The one at the top is... I can't even remember what they're writing a program for, but something. And at the bottom there, the female student there who's written a program, she just came up with this great idea. I just want to create this program that just randomly responds by drawing shapes on the screen and producing sound. And she did it using Scratch because that just seemed to be the most simple environment to do it in. I run a Coder Dojo club on a Tuesday after school. And we are going to be hosting some open events, but at the moment it's just for students, just to get them upskilled so they can act as mentors. And sometimes they just code for fun. And the program they produce has no purpose, it's just the sheer pleasure of them doing it. And I'm getting more and more and more kids coming, because they just want to learn how to do that. Kids want to do this, they really do. Not Raspberry Pi in sight yet, so if we go on to the next one, here we go. Right, so we've got some Raspberry Pi stuff going on. Bottom right is a network of Raspberry Pis. I taught the whole of the GCSE computing networking section using Raspberry Pi. It works. We don't have permissions to do fancy stuff on our school network, so I used Raspberry Pis. they're the administrator. They can set up user groups, user accounts, they can create a folder structure for that user, they can assign permissions at folder level for different users, and then they could log in as that user and test it out and prove that it worked. Setting up a network using static IP addresses. There's so many learning opportunities there. It doesn't work. Why is it not working? Go check that cable. You know, there's so many different learning experiences you can have. I realise I'm lucky. I'm an ex-Cisco CCNA graduate as well, so we've got some Cisco kit there. But you can get that cheap on eBay as well. And you don't have to use Cisco. You can use anything. The reason I like Cisco is it's very highly configurable, and I know how to do it. We have got some Cisco kit, but you know, you can get any second-hand switch will do the job. You've got a switch, you get some cables, plug them into your Pis, set static IP addresses, and away you go.
How
and
can you make setting a static IP address interesting for a child?
You don't have to, because then you can use DHCP. As long as you've got, you'd need to have a device that's going to act as a DHCP server. So, for example, any home broadband switch router thingy will do it.
No, I'm trying to. How do you? Because it seems like that's a really boring element.
They've got to be a purpose to doing it.
Yeah.
Why are they doing it?
So what? How do you?
So if you say to them, well, how are you going to connect your Xbox if you didn't have this and this? That's normally a hook, and we'll do it using a Raspberry Pi as a way of doing it.
And they were actually playing a game of Minecraft, so they all wanted to play.
So you tell them.
Well, first you've got to do this, because every Raspberry Pi's got to have its own address, and then they can chat and taunt one another. So that was the hook.
One of the other ways that I've done it is with using the Raspberry Pi is setting up as a wireless access point as well. So the Raspberry Pi is actually using the DHCP and sending that out as well, which is another way that they're sort of like all of a sudden get that in.
Yeah, fantastic. We also created a robotic buggy, so the bottom left-hand side, that is just second-hand Lego. I didn't go and spend any money. I raided my kids' toy box. But I'm sure if you send out an email to your staff and say, anybody got any old Lego they don't want, any Lego Technic in particular with the motors in, just see what you get come back. You might get quite a lot. And what is on there is a Raspberry Pi, and also there is a Pi face, which I should have somewhere. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So the trouble with Lego motors is some are 6 volt and some are 9. Do not connect your Raspberry Pi directly. Okay, this is a Pi Face Digital, and if you attended, has Andrew done a talk? Yeah. Dr. Andrew Robinson will tell you more about some of the projects that he's actually done using Pi Face. I think it's brilliant. It protects your Raspberry Pi, particularly if you want to do anything involving voltages that are above 5 volts, or you want to draw quite a large current from it. So we made this robotic buggy, and it's just using the Raspberry Pi and the Pi Face Digital to control the motors, and the program's written in Scratch. It's easy. The kids built the Lego. The programs are just Scratch, so that's easy. They're turning the motors on and off. What we couldn't do was reverse the motors, so you had to turn one off, the other one on, and then make it do like a 360 to reverse it, but it worked. The other thing I would mention to primary colleagues also is Makey Makey. So that's the top left-hand side. It is expensive, 40 quid. I think that's expensive, I really do. When that's only 25, I think 40 quid's expensive.
If you're interested in Makey, Alex Bradbury, who's in the room later on stage, is doing a talk about how you can make a Makey for 50p. So rather than spending 50 quid on a Makey, he's going to show you how to do it with a Raspberry Pi for a lot cheaper.
But for primary colleagues, if your head teacher will support you in buying them, they're really quite cool. It's just a little input device. And you've probably seen things like the banana piano. I'm not doing the banana piano, because Clive always says, oh, not another banana piano. My student actually made a controller out of, you can just about see it. I think she might have it in here. A piece of paper and pencil. Just drew, you're in luck. Because I didn't know I was going to do this talk. He actually made a controller, and there it is. Okay, just with graphite, just drawn on paper. And you use crocodile clips to connect that to the Makey Makey. What I like about it is it's so simple, and I can imagine this working well with primary colleagues. The Makey Makey works with the Raspberry Pi without any additional software or configuration needed. So you just plug it in, and then you can use some crazy thing as your input device for the program that you've got written in Scratch on your Raspberry Pi. So it all joins up, it all works together.
I use I've got Maker and I use it quite a lot. They create their own Scratch games, and then they work out what daft controller they're going to use. With my students, I have to stop them using each other as controllers because they like to hit each other, but I have to stop that. But we do get through a lot of fruit and things, but it is good.
But our buggy that we made out of Lego ended up in a German newspaper. I can't quite believe that, but it did. Anyway, can we get to the next one? Thank you. So this is just me teaching. Can I just say about the MOOC? I'm not going to push it too hard. Obviously, I am here representing OCR as well. If you're looking for resources, maybe yourself you're just feeling, I've got a bit of a gap in my knowledge. Can I recommend the Cambridge GCSE Computing MOOC? If you Google that, you will find it. I'm on there as one of the presenters. Clive's on there as one of the presenters. No, you didn't.
No.
But there are lots of other teachers who are presenting on there, and I'm really passionate about this subject, and I hope that all the people in this room are really positive about it as well. I appreciate it is a bit of a mind shift. We're introducing a whole lot of new topics that should be covered in schools because the kids love them. And that's the whole crux of it. I think we've got to get around the fact that this isn't for us. Kids love learning this stuff. They have so much fun actually making things. It's such a creative process. I'm really passionate that whatever we do in schools, the kids have got to be at the heart of it. And one of the campaigns, and I feel like I'm on a bit of a one-woman crusade at the moment, is I want to get every one of my pupil premium kids one of these. I want them to have a Wi-Fi dongle. I want to get them an internet connection, just a cheap, I pay £5 a month. And I'm sure we can afford that. So that the kids who perhaps don't have access to technology outside the classroom get a chance to play. And that's what I think education's all about. So thank you.
Can I just thank you for that? Can I just say that the Raspberry Pi community, one of the fantastic things about it, when I first engaged in this community, I remember sitting up in bed one morning and just saying to my husband, please can you just empty my head? There's so much stuff in there that's just going in, and I didn't know where to go with it. You come to these meetings and you hear all these buzzwords about makey, this, that and the other. If I was going to give anybody one piece of advice, it would be do one thing and try to do it well, and then share it. Share it with your colleagues, with everybody who's interested, who wants to see. My personal contribution was that I wanted to give something back to the community, the computing community, that's been good to me, and I've tried hundreds of different ways, as many as I can think of, to introduce the Pi into the PGCE programme. Those of you that are teachers here will know how compact the PGCE programme is and how difficult it is to get in a short space of time the amount of information that you need to be able to be a reasonably competent classroom teacher. Sam will bear me out here. I really tried really hard to get people engaged, and on top of everything else that we did, to add something else was really, really difficult initially, and a lot of people didn't grasp it. So what I did was I changed one of my assignments that I give to the students to be a Raspberry Pi based, and that's all I did. And the net result of that is 25 free resources that, instead of just keeping myself on a website, I'm going to go and see Carrie and we're going to see if we can get them up there and out there to teachers in the teaching community, because that's what it's about. It's about giving things back and making sure that what you've done, even if it doesn't work, sharing that you've had a go. Can I hand over to Jan now, please? Sorry.
In what context are we?
What have you been doing with your work?
So I think just to follow on from the ideas we've heard, and we're talking about getting it into the classroom. One of the things I've tried, and it proved successful, was if you think about the whole school and start identifying where your allies are. So there may be teachers who are interested and they may not be interested. There may be TAs who actually have an interest or a skill, and it's about finding out who has any interest or skill. So we, in one school I'm working with, we've actually got a TA who's mad keen on this stuff, and she's now the leader, if you like, for Raspberry Pi based stuff. And instead of, and as a gentle introduction to the school for the Pi, what we did was we identified a team of digital leaders amongst the pupils. So they're either nominated or self-selected. And we got them together, made a bit of a fuss of them, so they were kind of special, and did a project with that group, and they were year 5, 6. And they went back into the classroom and started quite a buzz about this new thing that they were doing, and it was coming into the classroom soon, so it was getting that buzz going. The project involved colleague Tim from Raspberry Pioneers that we've set up to come in and actually do the project. And what we did was, I don't know if anybody, I'm repeating from yesterday, we set up a monitor in school reception, Raspberry Pi, running Screaming. I know it's very basic, but the point is the kids did it. They did it in an afternoon, and every parent and visitor who comes to the school now sees the notice. It says these pictures are being run by this Raspberry Pi Arrow, and was done by digital leaders in year 6 photograph. And it actually contributes to the running and adds value to the school, so everybody can sort of see what it does rather than it being an abstract idea. And while that was happening, a teacher and the TA were learning about it quietly, so they weren't in a high pressure session. They're just quietly picking up the skills and the learning, so I know that next time she does any stuff with the Pi, she'll be able to connect it up a little bit better. And so it's a gradual introduction that way. And that project's a finalist for the Education Innovation Awards later today. So it's easy stuff. Another one is that school's just bought some chickens. And we're going to, with a group again, a group of digital leaders to get this buzz going, is we're going to set up a chicken cam. So motion activated, you know, just a little bit of video which they're going to stream and use and report on and blog on and whatever. So it's finding things that are really useful for the school is a good way in maybe for schools to start thinking.
I've got a question over here. Would you like to?
What you said earlier, I was interested in the moving around school with the equipment. Have you ever tried setting up in another classroom without any screens, right? And you've taken the whole lot, and how long has it taken you to get it going? Is it possible, or is it to anybody really on the panel?
Yeah, when I had Raspberry Pis, like people always ask me how do you have them in the classroom? You know, we don't use the IT infrastructure in the classroom, so everything was portable and transportable. And before that, I had to give up my classroom because the headmaster wanted to have a meeting in it. So we just took all the equipment to like a history classroom. I just had lots of gang, you know, 4-ways plugged in. And the kids just, every lesson anyway, the kids set up all of their Pis themselves. They put the screen out, they get a keyboard and mouse, they plug in their Pi. All my SD cards were numbered for every class. So every class had their own set of SD cards. So like, what number are you? Student A, student B. What numbers are you? And they would tell me their numbers and I would give them their card. And they're up and running. And in answer to your question, how long does it take? Like, the first lesson, it's a bit of a faff, you know, you have to kind of dedicate a lesson to them understanding it. But after that, they get so quick at it. They are, you know, it's quicker than getting them to sit down and log onto a computer sometimes. Like, they're so quick. And for the lower ability students, they just love it. They love it. They love getting hands-on with this stuff. And the really surprising thing is that they ask questions. And as an educator, that is the most important thing. And you know you've got them when they start asking you questions about the equipment. What is this? What does it do? What happens if I do this? And actually, it's really not very hard at all.
That's very admirable, but I think a lot of teachers are a bit frightful of that setup.
Just frightened of plugging things in?
You might not be set up within 10 minutes. You're not allowed to do your starter officially and all that sort of stuff. You know,
But I think every teacher who teaches computing, there is 5 minutes or maybe 2 minutes at the start of your lesson where you have your students lined up outside, you bring them in, they sit down, they log in, they then access whatever it is they're going to do. So you've already given over that time. Every ICT teacher gives over that time. This time is no different. They come in, they pick up their equipment, stick it on the table, log in.
Better experience, I would say.
Absolutely.
If they're asking questions, it is just
Absolutely.
Can I just
Yeah.
say, as somebody who's done this a number of times in a number of different settings, my first piece of advice would be, first of all, go and check the venue prior to doing it and anticipate what problems are going to be. And those can be, you know, they can be easily overcome by knowing what equipment that you need to be able to go there first. The second thing I would say is to familiarise your children with the equipment, and the majority of them will tell you what they need to do. I'm not exaggerating there. The majority of children I've introduced to the Pi have told me what to do with it, and in a polite way as well. I've not been rude or anything like that. But yeah, they will lead you, and if you need some help, you know, contact the community. Somebody will come and support you. I would come out myself and support you if you need it in your school and show you how to set these up. The other thing that I can say to you, I'm sorry to be, to hijack this, but this is a community of people that want to share. It's a perfect opportunity to recycle. At our university, we've got a group of monitors that we're just going to be thrown out. You know, little flat screen monitors that we're going to be thrown out, and I'm like, no, don't throw them out. We're going to use them, and they're going to be taken out to these clubs in schools who are going to be using them with the Raspberry Pis. There's pound shops. How many people know about pound shops? You can get keyboards, mice. You know, you can get those little dongles that lady was talking about in pound shops. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you can get loads and loads of things really, really cheaply to make this work. You know, and it's about being proactive, getting yourself out there. Ask, you know, I'll help. There's loads of people I can point you in the direction of that will support you with this endeavour to get the Raspberry Pi into the classroom. It's something that I feel really personally passionate about. I've spent 20 years in my teaching career. Okay, my husband's in the IT industry, and he can't get people to do the jobs that he wants. He just can't. And I've tried my best through the years to drag people through who I think, and then we get all these different curriculums that teach children how to type, how to use a word processor, and we actually need people who can program. That's what we need. We need people who can program and people who can give back. And actually, a really, really good way to start the children off is to take them into a business that has a call centre and an IT department in the same location, and ask them to look at the cars, ask them to look at the working conditions. Okay, I took my year 10s who I was introducing computing to, boring business, you know, and all this sort of, I took them into Manchester on a bus, you know, and we went into an IT organisation. We went into the call centre first and had a look at these people who were glued to the consoles because they couldn't move because the break times were monitored. You know, and I'm not going to go on about the conditions of working in a call centre because I don't want to be political about this, but then I took them upstairs to the people who were working in the IT department and programming, you know, they had basketball rings up on the wall and free teas and coffees, and, you know, people coming in and going out when they want to, you know, Aston Martin cars in their parking lot, you know, because they are good at what they do, and that is one way of being able to hook children into this community, you know, actually in the pocket where they know, you know, and I could take you now to a recruitment agent in Manchester that would offer those kids jobs at £40,000 a year. I have a son who's done it. My son, who is 22 years old now, he was programming, and when he stopped, he saved up enough money to go and do some humanitarian work, but he saved up to do that himself from a career in programming. He hasn't been to university, and I really probably should be saying that as a university lecturer, but he didn't. He went straight out into the world of programming with an A-level in maths and taught himself how to program because the teachers in the schools were not able to teach him what he needed to know. And I'm appealing to you guys here to jump on board with this and ask the community to help you, because that's why all these people are here. That's why we're all here to do what we're trying to do. to get children to use this little amazing box. And if it means you've got to give up a Saturday morning to go to a club, or an evening to go to a jamboree, or spend an hour on a YouTube video, I promise you that in little investment of your time, that little tiny investment of your time, will pay you back in dividends in the children that you work with. I'm sorry if that seems like I'm, hijacking it again, but you can see that I'm really passionate about this. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question?
Before you I just wanted to come back to this point about, teachers scared to use Raspberry Pi because perhaps it takes up a bit of time in the lesson, and there should be a formal lesson. I taught with Raspberry Pis during an Ofsted inspection. I was inspected, getting those Raspberry Pis out, putting them on the desk, plugging them in, and that Ofsted inspector didn't once question that at all. It didn't affect my grade or anything, so that shouldn't be a teacher's concern at all.
Yeah, I'll just back on Carrie saying. I had an observation recently where I got a grade 2 and my starter was setting up the Raspberry Pi.
Fantastic.
That was the start of the session, so...
Fantastic. 2 people collaborating, that's what we want.
What I did want to ask though was how resilient are you finding the Pis for what you're doing, plugging in and taking...
Very resilient. Yeah, well, the BBCs were, to be fair, I can remember back using BBCs with students, and they were pretty resilient as well. But Raspberry Pis, I've known any problems with mine at all. I'll tell you what I have had problems with: the powered hubs. I am not endorsing a company by any means, but I'm just sharing my personal experience with you. I had the powered hubs from Element 14, and I was not impressed. I think they're about £4, are they? Yeah, I wasn't very impressed with them at all. But I have one that I bought from Maplin. I've got a 7-port one because I plug lots of things in. So I bought the 5-port ones for school, and they're really, really good. And I've had my one, I take it to every exhibition that I do, and it seems to be really robust. So I've now got the same variety but a little bit smaller for my students at school, and so far they're holding up well. But that's what I've had problems with, but not the Pis at all.
Have you had problems with your...
I've had a couple of ones that have been damaged by, I'm still trying to work out what it is. I have a feeling it might have been the VGA to HDMI converters. We got a load of fairly cheap ones and they didn't turn out to be in the end of that. I get the impression they draw power from the HDMI port because of the conversion. Have you had a similar problem, have you?
Yeah, and sorry, I've actually, when through this, I'm actually in industry myself. One of the problems with the HDMI to VGA converters, they do draw power. The HDMI specs allow you to draw about 2 parts of basically stuff or power. A lot of the VGA adapters take more. There's a particular diode on the Pi called the D1 diode, which you can actually blow up if there's too much power, which means it all goes a bit pear-shaped at that point. You've got to be careful, especially if you go to the cheap, dodgy, blah blah blah. It's problematic.
The VGA kind of thing is an issue, in classrooms as a teacher. When I wanted to use Raspberry Pis, all the monitors in my classroom I could use were all VGA, and quite early on I realised that was going to be an issue. So like you said, I just went on Twitter and I just wrote, I'm desperate to use a Raspberry Pi in my classroom, I need 10 monitors. And someone who lived about half an hour away from me in Chelmsford said, yep, we're getting rid of 10 DVI monitors, if you come and get them, they're yours. Great. I was there the next day, picked them up, and I had all the monitors. So HDMI to DVI was much easier to do than VGA, but I think VGA adapters are getting better and cheaper now for the Pi.
Sorry,
I just wanted to say on this HDMI to VGA adapter, I can just give you the model number. There's one which CPC sells, which is very low cost, it costs me about £10, and it's got a micro USB input as well, so you need slightly more power adapters, or have something which can power more, but that way you don't have to worry about it drawing too much power from HDMI. So it's
Anybody got any more questions? Yes.
I'd like to ask a second one tonight. The big problem that a lot of people, should they go for Scratch or should they go for Python? And where do the people think it should vary?
There's more than just Scratch or Python, isn't there? There's Sonic Pi as well. There's lots of things you can do with a Pi.
But if you're you've got to explain it in your literature to parents and that. What are you going to offer them? It could be all sorts of things that are nothing to do with this at all, of course. But if you're going to use the Pi, what would it be?
Okay. I'm happy to take that one. If you look at the new programme of study, really what we're teaching students is and this was a term that was used on Wednesday, is this algorithmic thinking. So actually, in a way, the language kind of doesn't matter. So that's unhelpful, but that's the way it is. So in my career, I've been teaching, well, say a long time, so many different programming languages, I've just lost count. I've taught Pascal, I've taught C, I've taught C++, badly. I've taught Java, I'm still teaching Java now, Assembler, you know, so many programming languages, but there's something that kind of brings it all together. There are some basic things you have to learn how to do, and they're the important things to get through to kids, is how do we write code that accomplishes certain things. Now, practicalities, what languages are you going to use? The Raspberry Pi supports Scratch. Scratch very often is taught in primary schools, so you might find, are you primary or secondary, sorry?
No, I'm an ex-teacher now.
You're an ex-teacher now. Okay, if you are a primary colleague, Scratch is great because kids can just play with Scratch and they will learn by playing.
Scratch GPIO?
Yes, and with the GPIO as well, you can actually have input and output, so they can see they can write a program and it'll turn on an LED. So they can understand the processing and the input and the output that generates. So you can do a lot with Scratch. And as I said, Scratch can just be played with and kids will learn. Like my student who wrote that program that just drew the circles and other shapes on the screen, she just did that off her own back. I didn't tell her to do that, she did it. And that's what you can do with Scratch. So for self-teaching, Scratch is great. Python's a bit more tricky to self-teach. If you don't understand how Python works, it becomes very tricky. My colleague mentioned use of capitalisation, that's important. Use of indentation, that's important. When to use brackets, when to use a colon. So there's a syntax involved with Python that you've got to learn. So yes, younger students can learn Python, but I wouldn't start with it because they'll get fed up with it, they'll get frustrated.
They have to know a certain level of literacy to be able to do Python and
Yeah.
be really precise and exact with it.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
Does that literacy requirement, I'm not a teacher, not a technologist at all, but my experience is that the fact that you've got to spell everything correctly, it's got to be in the right order and everything, does that attract a certain sort of person to programming?
Well, I
Or
would
does it
especially
exclude somebody who may be more visual?
No, I don't think it excludes someone that's more visual. I think you do have to be very precise about what you're doing, obviously, as a programmer, if you're looking at things. And I find some of the children that are more on the autistic spectrum in my school actually find that it's a lot easier to do.
I've taught one of the most dyslexic people I have ever met. I have taught programming to, and he was one of the best programmers ever. You know, he was in, I think it was the Hereford Times. He completed his HND in software engineering, and he was an outstanding programmer.
But these aren't the only, I kind of bring back to Sonic Pi, just because it's my thing, and, you know, I love it. But if you have Raspberry Pis, you know, there's free piece of software on there called Sonic Pi, which I used in between Scratch and Python. So my Year 7s were doing Scratch, my Year 8s did Sonic Pi, and my Year 9s did Python, because on the new program study you need to teach at Key Stage 3 using 2 programming languages. One must be text-based. So we developed Sonic Pi so that, and it used Ruby. Ruby's a really nice syntax, but you can code music using it. So you can write the word play followed by a value like 60, which is the note, and it will play that note. And so very easily you can teach sequencing, you can teach loops, you can teach data structures, conditionals, variables if you wanted to. It has so much to it, and it's instant, it plays music and sound. So it's a really nice bridge between something like Scratch and then going to something a bit more complicated that is text-based like Python as an in-between. You don't have to worry about indentation, and the syntax is really nice and easy, and it's instantaneous, it's giving instant feedback. So that's another reason that makes Raspberry Pi so good.
There's things like Coda.
Yeah, Google Coda is amazing.
Can I just interject as well? Quite a number of my outstanding trainees have been dyslexic, quite a number of them, and they've said that their introduction to coding and their, you know, their use of coding has improved their language skills. And you know, I've got 5 of my trainees at the moment. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to identify them for confidentiality reasons, but 5 of my trainees are quite seriously dyslexic, and they are fantastic coders. So you know,
It does help, because coding is usually a fairly simple syntax. I'm dyslexic myself and I work in the IT industry, and it's actually it's something that often dyslexics are actually, on average, better than the rest of the population. It just works well.
That's what I was going to say. I'm teaching AS computing, and I have a very dyslexic boy who's taking it, and we're coding in Python, and he uses the magnifier that comes onto the magnifier section of code that he's working on, and I actually find him, although he may be slightly slower than some of the other students, he's much more precise because he's had to always take care of syntax of everyday words. So learning to take care of syntax in Python is not too difficult for him because he already has trained himself to do that. So.
Can I just mention two things, otherwise I'm going to forget. I was actually at university with a very dyslexic person as well, and we had to write this program that involved bit flipping, and I find binary tricky, but he didn't, because he didn't have that kind of, I think, because I'm not dyslexic, I think of things in a very sort of sequential way, and I'm very rigid in the way I think of things, and he didn't, and he was far quicker than me, and it was fantastic to see. And isn't this great, that we've actually got something that can really, really allow these kids to fly, and that's fantastic. The other thing I wanted to say was Penguin. Penguin is a little project. It's spelled P-Y-N-G-U-I-N. It's Python-based, and it's a graphical environment, but it's also text-based, and it uses Logo. So if anybody remembers Logo, programming language, you want a simple text-based programming language. You've got the Logo syntax appears, a little cute penguin, actually you'd love this, actually walks around and draws on the screen, so you can do pen up, pen down. You can have multiple penguins on it. It's really cool, and I can imagine that working really well in primary school as well.
Gentleman at the back here, could you? Sorry.
I'm a primary teacher. I'm just echoing some of the points before that we've just started Code Club, and that's from our 5s and 6s, and it's been remarkable just how quick they have picked that up, and they are racing through this really, really well. So we're looking now at sort of Raspberry Pis. What I'm wondering is, does anyone have any experience of Raspberry Pis in, say, Key Stage 1?
So to interrupt very briefly, there's a 5-minute call from Mr. Philbin.
I've got to go.
Sorry.
Sorry. Okay, please come and find me if you want to speak to me. Clive, do you want to swap?
Yeah, I will,
Who is the educational director?
Carrie,
I'll pick up on the point about Key Stage 1, and this is personal, from my kids being at primary school. Even in reception they had BBC computers. Now this was in the 1990s, they were still using, so they must have been good. And they had a very simple program, and it was called Pod, I think. And you would put in an instruction. I see somebody nodding, might remember it. You could put in an instruction, and you'd say Pod can, and then you'd give it the instruction. The one they liked best was Pop, because this thing would just graphically explode on the screen. But it was understanding that you issue a command and you produce some output. Now, if we can perhaps get hold of that program and look at it and think about also how we present the Raspberry Pi to young kids, I mean, I think that's pretty robust. But the problem with a Key Stage 1 student is they're going to do that. So we maybe need to look, Clive, at how we can put the whole thing in something, maybe.
Cardboard box.
Yeah, we do.
You can also cut the end off an SD card.
Micro SD card adapter, that solves it. There's loads of ways around it.
Yeah. But that sort of really simple, I issue a command and it produces this output, and maybe, stringing the commands together. Hey, how much Key Stage 1 software is out there? We need to.
Well, Key Stage 1, I've taught Scratch to 5-6-year-olds, and they suck it up as long as they don't even need to have a massive level of literacy to read the tags, because it's quite visual anyway, and they can recognise the tags. At that age, I'd be doing more sort of CS unplugged stuff. I'd be out in the playground with them with chalk and string and tin cans, or doing little binary kind of colouring in to doing coding and stuff. And I think the message I bang on about a lot is that the media and so on have just put over this idea of coding
I'm not going to hijack this talk about it, but it's really, you don't even need a computer to start doing computing at Key Stage 1, and I think my primary colleagues, once they understand that you can actually do this sort of amazing, creative, cool card tricks and all sorts of weirdness without a computer to understand concepts and learn concepts, then they kind of like, wow, isn't this fantastic? Here's a jam sandwich and it's an algorithm, you know. Then I think that's the way in for especially that sort of age group.
Any other questions? Yes,
I'm a primary IT coordinator, and our children have no prior knowledge, or most of them have no prior knowledge of computing, and I'm concerned especially about my Year 6 children moving on, starting the new curriculum in Year 7. What do they need to know that I can show them in a short space of time to get them ready for what are the basics, basically? That's what I'm asking.
They probably actually know a lot more than you think, because when you actually look at the POS and everything on there, and I've just run an inset day for a primary school, and they all said, oh, we don't know anything about computing, and then I gave them the POS and I asked them to highlight the things they didn't know, and they highlighted hardly anything, and then you just start talking about some of that computing jargon that's there, you know, what's an algorithm, decomposition, abstraction and stuff, and once you explain it, you go, well, we're actually doing that. We're doing precise instructions. We abstract everything all the time. We break everything down into little things all the time. So they actually already got most of the computer science terminology that they'll need for going on to secondary school. They just don't know they've got it. So I would say you just take that. If you go to codeit.co.uk, Phil Bagg, who's one of the other computing school master teachers, on there he's got some CS planning, and on the right hand side at the bottom there's a bit there which is computing jargon for primary school teachers, and he explains it all the way through with some fantastic little ideas. And I think if you just went through that, you would suddenly realise that actually they've got most of that already.
Can I just also tell you, I belong to an organisation called Include, which is an organisation for inclusive computing, and there is a website. I haven't got the URL just to hand, but if you tweet me, I will forward it on to you. I'm at Dawn Hewitson. I will forward you links, and on there are a number of free resources that you can have access to that have been put together by a lady called Laura Dixon, who is called Code Boom on Twitter. And if you don't get them from me, she will supply them for you. Okay, that's another.
But CS Unplugged, I think, should be compulsory at primary school.
Absolutely, CS Unplugged.
I can see people dashing off. If anybody wants to have my email address, my school in their infinite wisdom bought me 500 business cards, of which I've given away about 6. So if anybody
can I thank our panel, and can I thank you for attending, and please, we've got contact details up there. If you need any help, we're here to help, okay? And thank you for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The foundation as well is launching a website at the end of March, which will have an area for teachers, resources and stuff, including primary stuff.
Fantastic. Well, you're welcome. Thank you.